Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Liz Bridgewater, the Director of Outreach at Climate Action Now. It will be just a few moments while people continue to gather. While we're waiting for everyone to join, I invite you to answer the icebreaker questions that you'll see pop up on your Zoom screen in just a moment. Alrighty, you should be seeing those questions now. The first question is, what's your current mood around climate change? Secondly, getting us to a core part of today's conversation, what makes you feel hopeful about climate change? And finally, what motivated you to join this monthly dose of Climate Hope event today? If you're feeling up for it, please also share your video so we can all see each other. We will be recording this event and it will be available publicly online. If you do not wish to appear in any shared content, please keep your camera off. We will send out the recording after this event. I'm very grateful that everyone is here today because even though the news has been upsetting lately, there is still hopeful information about the climate. People just don't hear enough about it. So thank you for joining us today to get your monthly dose of climate hope. Let's share the results of our icebreaker poll now. Kaylee, would you share those results?
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Kaylee Beam, Director of Content at Climate Action Now. And before we kick off the interview, I'm just going to quickly share the results of our icebreaker poll. So you should be seeing them already. I pressed share. But our first question is, what's your current mood around climate change? And it looks like we've got a pretty good distribution, but our top answers, I feel a mix of many emotions. Very fair. It's definitely hard to escape those feelings of doom or fear, especially right now. But I'm really excited about our conversation today, where we can kind of center some of the solutions and progress and reasons to be hopeful. So we can feel many things at once, right? It's part of our humanity. Moving on to our next question. What makes you feel hopeful about climate change? So our top answer is activism from concerned citizens, which is awesome. That's exactly what we're all about at Climate Action Now, right? Using our public opinion, which is using our voices, which are our superpower, and making sure all of those decision makers know how we feel about things. But the mix of answers here really highlights, just how many levers for change there are and how much we can achieve. And lastly, what motivated you to join this monthly Dose of Climate Hope event today? And our top answer is, I love learning more about climate solutions. Well, you've come to the right place. And if you do love getting doses of climate hope, today is going to be a monthly one. We're hoping to have these events. This is the first installment in our monthly Dose of Climate Hope series. But if you're ever interested in a daily or weekly dose, make sure you're subscribed to the Climate Action Now Dose of Climate Hope newsletter, which I will drop a link in the chat of that. So thanks so much for participating in our poll to kick things off and get us ready for this hopeful and insightful conversation. I'm going to hand things back over to Liz just to introduce our speaker today and get things started. All right, back to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. Today, Sam Matey, the editor-in-chief at Climate Action Now, will be talking with our incredible guest speaker, Dr. Sugandha Srivastav. Sam authors the Dose of Climate Hope Substack newsletter for Climate Action Now. Dose of Climate Hope illustrates new technologies, policy solutions, people, and trends that give us reason to be hopeful about the climate. Dr. Sugandha Srivastav is a lecturer in environmental economics and a senior research associate at the University of Oxford. Dr. Srivastav works at the intersection of energy, environment, and innovation economics, focusing particularly on developing economies. She lectures on environmental innovation, climate policy, and the economics of biodiversity. Her research has been focused in The Guardian, Financial Times, BBC, and other popular media outlets, including a TED Talk. We'll now transition into our live interview. As you hear from Dr. Srivastav and Sam, please type your questions into the chat. Over to you, Sam.
All right, hi. So I'm Sam Matey, and I am extremely excited to be talking with Dr. Srivastav today. She's a brilliant environmental economist, and the thing that I'm most excited about hearing about is that she's gotten really good at identifying specific instances in the world where really good things happened really quickly. Where renewable energy got moved from a small percentage to a large percentage of a nation's electricity in a matter of months or years. Where large scale response to climate change has overcome key roadblocks. It's often just one key sort of obscure roadblock that's stopping stuff from happening, and then lots of good things happen. So I basically love to hear a lot of those case studies, Dr. Srivastav. And the one I'd love to start with, just because it's the one that stuck in my mind the most, and I believe it's the one that the action today is based on. Dr. Srivastav's work has inspired a bunch of the Daily Dose climate actions that I've written for the app and the Substack. Could you tell me about your work in the case study of Chile and how that Latin American country unleashed a solar revolution?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming, and obviously to my lovely hosts. The work of Climate Action Now is amazing, and I'm just thrilled to be here. So, yeah, I love to really find these instances, as Sam said, where we do see rapid transition happen, and to really provide you all with evidence that is the bedrock of creating hope. So Chile is a very, very interesting case study because so just for a little bit of context, it's a South American nation, very long and skinny in the southern hemisphere. And for the longest time, Chile was quite reliant on coal. Now it was quite problematic for several reasons. The coal wasn't cheap. And at the same time, there was the sense that, well, there's the Atacama Desert in the north of the country, which is just this huge chunk of land with huge amounts of solar irradiation and free land, and it's just not being utilized. So essentially, Chile's government realized that there was one critical roadblock, which was not basically stopping the energy transition from happening. And that was the simple fact that there was no way to get electricity generated by solar power from the Atacama Desert, which is in the north of the country, down to the capital, Santiago, which is in the south. And this geographic distance is quite significant. Most of the population lives down south, and it's concentrated in the capital city as well as some other clusters, whereas this barren desert is all the way up north. So it decided that, right, we're going to try to solve this. And the funny thing is, the moment the government announced it would build a transmission line, investment into solar started already flowing just based on the announcement. So this is even before construction had started. So you already kind of saw the market react to this. And they're like, wait a minute, what? You're going to build this line? So that was the first piece of good news. We saw that even a simple announcement can actually catalyze a huge amount of investment. Then they built a partial amount of the transmission line, and we saw even more solar enter the market. And then the entire transmission line connecting the desert all the way down to Santiago in the south was completed. And guess what? This country went from hardly any solar, so close to, negligible percentage, 0 to 1%, to actually 1/5 of its entire electricity grid being powered through solar. And this was in a matter of 3 years because of one strategic piece of investment. Now, let me add two more pieces of good news. Um, Prices of electricity before solar were $200 per megawatt hour. That was the kind of highest prices and a commonly observed price. Now, I love to ask this question to my students, which is, how much do you think prices fell after the integration of solar? I don't know, Sam, if you want to guess or anyone else wants to take a punt.
I read your article. I've
You
cheated, but
know.
yeah, feel free to put any guesses in the chat. Before the power line bringing solar from the desert to the cities, prices about like 200 per megawatt. How much did they fall to?
Right. So keep 200 in your mind. Type in your
That's the
answers.
price. Free solar, free power line. Feel free to just take a random guess.
Exactly. Don't be shy. I'm looking at the
Just
chat.
put a random number in the chat.
Okay, I
Okay.
see there's
Okay.
100,
50,
50,
50, 100. All right. 100,
100.
100. Yeah.
You're gonna love the answer. Okay, I'm gonna give a hint. Dream bigger. Oh, John. John Burgess, 20. Yes, yes, that's right. It fell by to $20 per megawatt hour. Good job, John Burgess. If you
Electricity prices fell to a tenth of their former price in Chile because of
mm-hmm,
solar.
mm-hmm. John, if you want to turn on your camera and wave to everyone, feel free.
Excellent
Because
guess, John Bogus.
because that's right. So we saw it drop tenfold. And the reason is simple because if you think about solar, once you've put the panels, the fuel for solar is free, right? No one pays for sunshine. Whereas the fuel for fossil fuels has to be continually dug up, transported, paid for, imported in Chile's case. And that ends up being very costly. So that's a critical difference in renewables and fossil fuels. Both fossil fuels and renewables have to be built, right? You pay the upfront building cost, but then the running cost of fossil fuels is often much, much higher because, coal, oil, gas, they're not God-given or free, right? You've got to extract them. Okay, so
In some
that's
parts of the
one
US,
piece of it.
go ahead.
Sorry,
In some
no, please.
Dr. Srivastav has absolutely put a finger on the nub of one of the most important economic facts in the world today that sadly many governments still don't understand or choose not to understand to please their fossil industry donors. The lack of ongoing fuel costs just makes renewables an unbeatable economic proposition. The reason there are still fossil fuels is due to non-market forces like incumbency and subsidies and political connections. Like in the US right now, in most of the country, it is cheaper to build a new solar plant to supply the same amount of electricity as keeping running an old coal plant. Just the cost of feeding the coal plant with coal is more than building the new solar plant. So this is a really, really key dynamic here that Dr. Srivastav is discussing.
Absolutely. And the second thing is now you all might ask, okay, building a transmission line all along the length of Chile, maybe that was an expensive thing to do. So, how long did it take for Chile as a country to recover that investment? And actually, because of the huge drop in prices that was observed, the estimates are 5 to 8 years. There's a range because it depends on how much you discount the future and a couple of technical things. But actually, to pay off a big piece of infrastructure in 8 years is kind of remarkable. Normally, just to like give you the context, we're happy if we can pay off a big piece of infrastructure in one generation, i.e., 30 years. So to see this return on transmission line happen in 8 years is what economists would actually consider remarkably fast and basically a no-brainer investment. So that is a little pitch on Chile. Sam, I don't know if you have questions or comments.
So just a couple more case studies just to show sort of what is possible around the world. Because in a lot of countries, especially my country, the US, I think, it's very easy for sort of the news to become a bit insular, like especially if it's a large country with a lot of stuff going on domestically, like the US. And like I feel like these case studies that Dr. Srivastav is pointing out are really important just to show like what is achievable, that the bounds of the possible on climate action especially are not bound by what is possible in your own country's domestic politics or what feels plausible. Amazing stuff actually has already happened to do rapid transition to renewables. So I'd love to talk about a couple more of those examples to really underscore that. Like, could you like? I really loved your article on Uruguay, and could you discuss sort of the story of how Uruguay got one of the cleanest grids in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Uruguay, again, we're back in South America. It's a country that is involved in agriculture and it It's a very remarkable case study because Uruguay made the transition to renewable energy, specifically wind power, back in 2009. Okay, and if 2008, you all will remember, was the financial crisis. If you rewind the clock, 2008 and 2009, in that era, there was still a lot of skepticism around renewables. The Economist magazine, which is extremely popular, was saying that the energy transition is impossible, that, it's just not practical. And The Economist, as we all know, is an extremely well-read magazine. But this particular country defied all odds, and it actually saved money. So let me tell you what happened. 2008 in Uruguay was a very, very warm year. So Uruguay was very reliant on hydropower, but because of climate change impacts, hydropower is actually suffering a lot. So normally, you'd expect a certain level of generation of electricity, but because the earth is getting hotter and drier, hydropower generation is dropping. Okay, so Uruguay experienced actually one of the most devastating drops in hydropower electricity generation, to the point that they had load shedding, blackouts. It was a very tough time. Now, there's another thing that happened. Oil prices also quadrupled. Okay, so if some of you will remember this, that was a very, very bad year for oil prices, and Uruguay was actually using oil to generate half of its electricity. And if you can imagine what a shock this would have been to the people of Uruguay to know that their bills have now gone up so substantially because oil markets were in chaos and the prices had quadrupled. So these twin shocks basically encouraged Uruguayan authorities to think about alternatives. And at that point, they were looking around and thinking, okay, hydropower isn't safe enough. Like, we know it's clean, but climate change is happening. We need to do something else. Oil was out of the question. That, like, we're importing this, prices have quadrupled. We can't keep relying on oil. And then they were scanning around, and actually, someone suggested, what about wind power? Because Uruguay is a very windy country and it has a lot of pasture lands and it's very sparsely populated. So when this proposal reached the table, they calculated the costs and they figured out, actually this is a no-brainer, because like the point that was made before, you build the turbines, but the wind is free. So, you're still going to win in that regard. Um, and they basically held renewable energy auctions to encourage private investment. And from 2009 all the way up to 2013, they went full steam ahead and they actually surpassed their target. So they went in a span of like about 5 years from negligible wind generation, like basically zero, to 1/3 of the entire electricity mix, which now comes from wind. And the best part? In that time, Uruguay went from having an electricity sector that needs, where oil is 50% of the entire mix, to 9% today. That is a remarkable change, which has happened in less than 15 years. So when someone tells you, hey, energy transitions take a generation, or we can't see change now, I have to say, well, just look at the last 10 years. Chile, Uruguay, and this is change that's been from 0% share to double-digit share. So it's made a very big difference. Now, the interesting thing about Uruguay is that this was happening at a time where climate skepticism was at a high, and there wasn't a belief in wind power. So they did something very clever. They held auctions, but they also said, look, if you're a wind developer, we'll commit to buying your wind power for 20 years. And that really helped investors. They said, okay, 20 years sounds like a really good deal. You're giving us security. And because of that deal, they said that great, we'll come in. And from Uruguay's side, they're like, offering that deal was a no-brainer because on the other hand, with these oil prices that had quadrupled, and it was wholly reliant on importing that oil from neighbors who were not super friendly. I mean, there's Argentina on one hand and global crises on the other. So for them, it was a great deal too. And so essentially, this is the story how that country transitioned. And today, in terms of how much electricity is cleanly generated in Uruguay, it's 90 to 93%, and that makes the country actually one of the cleanest grids in the entire world.
Spectacular. See, that is the kind of thing. This can happen. This is eminently doable. This is not some leap into the unknown. Like, we have seen this happen at the local and national levels. And it's also starting to happen. And this is one thing I'm really excited about. Now that there's this huge wave of quite cheap, often very subsidized clean energy technologies being exported from China, this is starting to be able to happen even faster and in even poorer countries. Chile and Uruguay were middle income nations, but this is starting to be able to happen kind of everywhere in the world, often going from no electricity at all to having clean electricity. So I would love for you to share the story of Namibia, if you don't mind me jumping around the world like this, because that really underscores how this is moving into Africa and other parts of the world that really need it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So we've been looking at kind of income nations. Obviously, they have their challenges, but now to really illustrate the power of the change, we're going to go to a very poor nation where a lot of the population actually still has no access to electricity. And that's Namibia. It's located in southern Africa. It has a population of 2 million. If you've seen the movie Dune, there were some scenes that were filmed in the Namibian desert, so that you might have a mental image of what it looks like. Very, very stunning country. But look, I mean, it has its developmental challenges. And one of the key things I often hear, and I'm originally from India, is that development and climate action are incompatible. The reason why I wrote about Namibia is I wanted to unpack that and check, is that really true? Is it really true that development and climate action are just fundamentally incompatible for some reason? And this is where the story of Namibia is very fascinating because Namibia, like Chile, has this vast desert. It has ample space. And essentially, what happened there was that they needed a development strategy that could bring cheap electricity to their population. Because, as I said before, a lot of their population had no access to electricity at all. And in fact, what was happening for Namibia was they had to import electricity from neighbors like Botswana and South Africa. And those import bills were increasing dramatically because this is a country that wanted to grow, that wanted to raise income levels. You need electricity to do that, but importing and raking up large import bills was proving to be highly unsustainable. So then they thought, right, they don't have they don't have many resources, but they do have a lot of sunshine. So they're like, one thing that can help us with our import problem is to actually rely on our solar. And so they then basically, and this is going to be one of the most remarkable stories out of all of the three, they actually, in a span of 7 years, went from negligible solar to solar accounting for 40% of their entire electricity mix. And that solar bringing electricity to people who had never experienced electricity at all. So their first experience of electricity was actually through solar power. Now, the best part was that this solar came in at 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That is very cheap. I want to give you some context. You know, um, if you see a bill of 10 cents per kilowatt hour, that's still reasonable. That's still good. Um, 2 cents is really cheap. Okay, so I mean, that is just dirt cheap solar. Um, and so essentially, this was a great development story because it was dirt cheap electricity. It was helping a country that was struggling with a huge import bill, and 0 to 40% in a span of 7 years is a highly non-trivial transition. Um, and by the way, because Namibia was such an excellent success story, um, the World Bank and development agencies are trying to support it further. So they're actually trying to build transmission lines, like in Chile, right? We know that transmission lines are very important to take electricity from where it's generated to where people need it. So the World Bank, after seeing Namibia's proven track record, said we're going to put together a consortium and offer 138 million to build more transmission lines to elevate the level of solar generation beyond 40%. And by the way, it's become a little bit of a regional hero because its electric utility has a bit of a celebrity status because other nations are like, wait a minute, how did you do that? It's so cheap and it's so dramatic, 0 to 40%. So I think it's a wonderful story which questions empirically this really pervasive narrative that development and climate action somehow can't go hand in hand.
Spectacular. That is exactly the kind of thing that really gives me hope for the future, that makes me really excited. Because, Bill McKibben had an article that just came out today saying the way they do it in foreign lands, appealing to the current US maniac president's latest tone of phrase. And of the US in particular, and I'm speaking from the US, I know you're speaking from Western Europe, likes to think of itself as always sort of by definition leading the world, but that is really not the case on clean energy. Much of the rest of the world is doing much better, much faster. And while it kind of sucks for America that they've missed out on so many leadership opportunities, America had the in engineering capacity to have led the world on this starting in the 90s. It is much better that someone's doing it, that so much of the world is moving to renewable energy so fast. And renewable energy is also still going in America. It's just kind of constantly under attack and sort of held down below its potential. But yeah, Dr. Srivastav, this is a really great point. And I wanna for the remaining time we have, I want to leave it up to you. There's some more national case studies. Um, there's someone just put Pakistan question in the chat. That was one of the national case studies I wanted to talk about. That's a huge issue, especially that's a huge fascinating point, especially right now with the subcontinental crisis.
Yeah.
But like we could talk about Pakistan, or we could talk about or we could I just put a link in the chat so if we don't talk about it. Or we could do a broader overview, whatever you think,
Yeah.
or whatever you think, or we could get into adaptation strategies like the architecture and mountain stuff you've written about, like whatever you want to talk about next.
I mean, I can also give a case study on Kenya because it's about a different type of clean energy on geothermal, which maybe could be interesting and is slightly different. Do you think that sounds good?
Sure, absolutely. Your call. Kenya, Pakistan, adaptation, overview, whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll get to Pakistan too. Let me start with Kenya while we're in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kenya's really interesting because it is situated atop the Rift Valley. And so geothermal energy is basically the idea of utilizing energy that's from deep within the earth. The idea is that in certain parts of the planet, this energy seeps up and it heats up water, and that really hot water can be used to generate steam, which moves a turbine, and it basically provides 24/7 power. Now, very expectedly, the places where geothermal energy is feasible is where you often have fault lines or fractures. So that's why California has a bit of geothermal because there's the San Andreas fault line. Kenya's on top of the African Rift Valley, so there's geothermal there. And Kenya, believe it or not, also has a grid that's 90% clean. Okay, so that I've already told you the hard-hitting line, but it started developing geothermal as far back as the 1980s. And it really accelerated its development of geothermal because of global oil price shocks. Okay, because prior to geothermal, the country was importing again, like Uruguay, like Chile. It was heavily reliant on imported fossil fuels. These turned out to be extremely volatile, extremely expensive at times. And like these other countries, it just got absolutely fed up with the fact that oil prices could quadruple or could go up sixfold, which was the most recent crisis. It went up sixfold. And it started accelerating its geothermal development. Now, what I want to say is the interesting thing here is that not only did Kenya make its own grid 90% clean, but it's actually helping other countries in Africa do the same because many of Kenya's neighbors also have massive geothermal potential. And Kenya has now become something of a local expert, and I would actually say a global expert in, geothermal development, exploration. And the reason I really want to highlight this is because sometimes there's a sense that developing countries would cannot be climate innovation leaders. But KenGen, which is Kenya's main electricity generating company, is a leader. And it is helping other nations develop its geothermal potential too. And so I think this is a lovely example where we can say, actually, there's climate leadership coming from corners of the world where you wouldn't expect it. Not only have they sorted out their domestic electricity mix and made it clean, they're helping their neighbors do the same, which I think is just this wonderful idea. So that's like another little piece on Substack. And I just love the regional corporation that's happening. Um, on Pakistan, you're probably asking this question because there was this Bloomberg article that said that in the last 3 years, Pakistan had this surprising solar boom where they imported about 14 gigawatts of solar. This is a very interesting case study because most of Pakistan's electricity grid is actually powered through fossil fuels, a bit of hydro, but mostly fossil fuels. And I think this is a very good cautionary tale because if the grid doesn't become clean and cheap, people are going to do it anyway, but they're just going to go off grid. And that's essentially what's happening in Pakistan. Many people were like, wait a minute, why are we paying so much for electricity if we can just import a solar panel, put it on our rooftop, and just do the entire thing ourselves? And because the fossil fuel grid is so expensive relative to the alternative of self-generating through solar, actually, there's been so much self-generation via solar that grid-based electricity consumption has dropped by 10% and it's getting even more threatened. So I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale to people who operate the grid. And in fact, actually, I have a draft Substack article looking exactly at this. So Kim, love the question. It's a good prompt for me to finish writing that article. But it's the cautionary note here to grid operators is that if you don't become clean and cheap, consumers will ditch you and they'll just do it themselves. And that's a threat to the business model of the grid. So if anyone knows any grid operators or local governments, tell them that, there's other options on the table and people in Pakistan, many of whom, live on $2 a day. We saw small anecdote just because I love this one. We actually have a project in Pakistan where we send survey enumerators and they go to villages under the poverty line to survey a lot of different socioeconomic variables. One of the villages where everyone lives under the poverty line pooled together their savings and installed a collective solar system so that they didn't have to buy fossil fuel-based electricity from the grid. Can you imagine a bunch of people all living under the poverty line, pooling their savings because they had calculated that this is cheaper for them than the present state? And I thought that that was just such an inspiring story because you know what it means to be in that sort of poverty. And for those people to make this investment, to me, is the most heartwarming and thought-provocative, um, a statement in support of the energy transition and to make the case that this is uplifting the masses. So that was
Technology
one
of
little
freedom.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the Pakistan thing shows. Pakistan is in many ways extremely dysfunctional. It's more or less ruled by a military junta. It is at the brink of sort of a war with its similarly nuclear armed neighbor with India again for like the fifth time in 10 years. It there were giant floods a couple years ago. There's droughts. There's a lot of issues. But in the middle, and Pakistan is not really capable of doing like exactly. Yeah, someone just pointed out the grid's unreliable, frequent long blackouts. That's a great point. So the country is not really super capable of doing like what China or the EU or until recently America was doing and trying to provide like big sort of support and federal incentives for solar power. And they're both having they're both countries like Pakistan both have less resources to transition to renewable energy at a government level, and they're hit harder by the impact of climate change. But the great thing about renewable energy is that you can do this bottom-up transformation. It's this technology of freedom. This is what I'm most excited about. This is technology of freedom that means like on the individual or village level or business level or anything, that people can just get stuff, buy stuff online, buy stuff from China, buy stuff from local manufacturers, put it up, and they have electricity. And that will not only help reduce emissions. Often these people are often producing very little emissions to start with in developing countries, so it's not as big an issue. But it prevents future emissions from coal plants or whatever, and most importantly, it directly helps those people survive the climate change war. It powers it powers a smartphone on which you can get storm warnings. It powers a light at which your kid can study to go to school and get a better job. It powers an air conditioner or even a fan during a heat wave that could keep your like elderly grandmother alive. So like the rapid rise of renewables isn't just helping stop climate change, it's helping people survive climate change. It's this technology of freedom and resilience that is coming right when we really, really need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and two other points to just add to that because they're in the chat with the questions, but um, you know, these are helping people at the ground level, Sam, as you said, and particularly, um, you know, there's this sense that farmers are always against renewables, but that's not true. So in Uruguay, I explicitly asked this question to a lot of experts who led the transition, and actually farmers were getting great payments for leasing their land for wind, and those payments actually surpassed agricultural revenues by several multiples in some cases, but were actually preferential. So there's there's often very good economics of it. And then in the case of solar, there's a comment on, can you combine it? Can you do agriculture plus solar, And
You totally
the answer
can.
is you totally can, right? So go to any UK solar company website. Most of them show elevated solar panels with sheep like grazing underneath. It's become a very common image to showcase. And that's totally possible. And the other thing about solar, which I really like, is that it's super modular, right? So if you want to put it on the rooftop and not use up space, you can also do that. That option is available. You can't chop up fossil fuel plants and put them on rooftops. We all know this,
You
but
can't have you can't have an oven-sized coal plant. Like it
no.
doesn't do good things. Yeah.
No, you can't. But
Yeah.
solar is so modular. It's really like a cake. Just chop it up, put it where you want, and it will work.
You can
So
have your cake and eat it too with solar.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. That's right.
so we're coming towards the end of the prepared questions that we had a response to audience. We have a response to audience questions Q&A section coming up. We're kind of naturally segueing into that. I just want to say, Dr. Srivastav, anything else you want to do to sort of capstone sort of this message that you have so diligently researched and are so kindly sharing with us today?
Well, I think my final point is, do share these stories of hope. That's, I think, the most important thing to counter these very dominant narratives. And also, just to say that there's a reason some of those narratives are spreading faster than the hopeful ones. The hopeful ones are so powerful and so rooted in evidence that if more people knew about this, this would be a home run, no brainer, done. And so, we're up against a big narrative war here that people don't want these stories to get out because incumbent interests would lose. To say Namibia lifted people out of poverty at 2 cents per megawatt hour through solar. How do you beat that? I mean, that's just like a win upon win. So yeah, please do share these stories. I think it's really important this message gets out.
Yes, absolutely. And someone just put in the chat, doom aids denial, which is so true. Like I did another article pretty much just about this, about the psychological aspect in January. Um, the someone telling you everything's screwed up is not asking anything of you. They're saying, okay, might as well eat ice cream in my PJs. The world's screwed. There's no need to do anything. But realizing that there's lots of good stuff happening means you're still in the fight. You have points on the board. Good stuff can happen, and there's a responsibility to try to make it happen. So doom is like the most sort of, it can feel progressive or chic to go, oh yeah, everything's just so totally screwed. But actually, that just means there's an excuse to never do anything, because if everything's totally screwed, nothing you can do can help. But there's really huge opportunities to do positive stuff. And that is, like Sugandha said, why I think it's really important to share these stories. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly.
And I think this is a good opportunity for me to jump back in so that we can kind of take some of the hopeful feeling this conversation has given us and turn them into action. So thank you so much to Dr. Srivastav and Sam for the wonderful conversation so far. And I know we're going to leave a little bit more time for audience Q&A, even though we've already been doing it all along. But before we get to that, let's just take one action together. So if you're new to the Climate Action Now platform, our app and website make it easy to send well-researched, personalized messages to political decision makers and business leaders. And so today we're going to let you take action using the app or the website. But one added benefit of using the app is that you can earn points by taking action. And when you earn enough points, Climate Action Now will actually plant a real tree on your behalf. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and show you
And I
just
just
how
want to
easy.
parallel.
Yeah.
There have been cases of massive sort of corruption or just plain screw ups uncovered in other tree planting schemes like that. You might have heard that the California plan for paying to plant trees or protect trees to reduce emissions actually turned out to have weird perverse incentives and end up causing more emissions because companies thought they could pay to pollute. We have really done the due diligence on our tree planting program. I've done a whole article about it. It's with a really strongly reputable community-based NGO in Kenya that's restoring mangrove forests and planting dry forests. So I'm just going to put the link for that in the chat and highlight that this is not your sort of everyday like plant a tree program. This is sort of the best of the best, top-notch, highly resourced.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for making that point, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. I don't want to take too much time away from the great conversation. But so what you see on your screen is an example action. And as you'll see, it only takes 3 touches to take one. So first, tap the Do It Now button. Then you can choose how you want to contact the decision maker that you're reaching out to. Because the app has your address, it knows who your federal, state, and sometimes local officials are. Then all you have to do is hit send, and you've taken action. Earlier, we've been talking about earning points towards a real tree, and so far, the Climate Action Now community has actually planted over 330,000 trees together, which is a pretty impressive number. So now that you've seen that sample action, that brings us to the action we'll be taking together today. So we heard that wonderful story about Chile and their clean energy revolution earlier. So we'll be telling our own state leaders about Chile's clean energy example. So go ahead and take out your phones or tablets and open up your camera app. If you have or want to download the Climate Action Now app, feel free to use the QR code box on the left. And as you're pointing your camera at the QR code, a little pop-up that says Climate Action Now should appear. Once it does, just tap on it to get to today's action. If you don't have the app already, tapping that bubble will take you to the App Store where you can download it for free. And once you have the app, all you need to do is follow the prompts to sign up, and it will take you right to today's action. And if you're not on the app or just prefer to take action using a web form, feel free to scan the QR code on the right instead. And if neither QR code works, don't worry, you can still take action. I will be dropping a direct link to the web form in the chat. So I think that's everything from me. I'm going to change my camera to the action QR code. So if you haven't scanned them yet, don't worry. And yeah, back to you, Sam and Sugandha, for any final remarks you want to make.
So I'll just make a final remark that I've worked with these folks for pretty close to exactly a year now, starting in sort of late May or June 2024, and I've kind of been obsessed with climate change and climate change activism since I was a little kid. This is by far sort of the most technologically advanced and up-to-date sort of efficient, proactive sort of activism that I've ever seen. Like this, they have an app that allows people to take dozens to hundreds of actions a day with a simple click. It's like the difference between Amazon and a mail order catalog compared to most forms of online activism. It's like a really great, streamlined, united platform to send lots of pre-written and customizable messages about important issues to your legislators. This is a startup. We're still getting traction. We're still trying to spread our model. We're trying to raise funding. We're trying to do a bunch of things. But I'm really excited about being part of this, and I think that the story about this is worth sharing. And oh, cool. Someone said they're supporting a startup company with a solar electric vehicle. That's interesting. But yeah, lots of people are working on cool stuff. Ooh, interesting. But yeah, like feel free to shout out in the comments. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to do whatever you want.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take questions, maybe there's some arguments or challenges that you face. I know a lot of people come to me and say, "Hey, I heard this and this argument that is against renewables. What do you think is the right response to that or the right way to counter that?" So I'd be very happy to also, give ideas on that.
Go ahead. Share whatever you want to share.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing that is, one thing that's really funny is that many people, when I write about renewable energy, says, well, the sun sets at night. And I'm like, oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that. But,
Yeah. Batteries. Yeah.
I'm like, wow, thank you for educating me on that. I'm sure many people working across renewable energy never considered that possibility, and have been blindly just going along. But I think so. My first strategy is kind of exactly to sort of make that joke because of course we have all realized that the sun sets, and the other thing is to actually use data. And so I love to give the example of India, where solar costs about two rupees per kilowatt hour, and coal costs 6 rupees per kilowatt hour. So that's a three times difference. And the case is very simple. If for 8 hours of the day you can run on a technology that is three times cheaper, and then at sunset for 1 to 2 hours you need to use a different technology, maybe coal. India doesn't have batteries yet, but hopefully in the future they can use batteries. But if for 2 hours you do need to use that coal because everyone's coming home and turning on their kettle or TV, it's still cheaper to do that than to keep the coal going for the entire 10 hours. So why would you throw the savings that would come from using cheaper, far cheaper to do that mix of solar and then use fossil fuels for that tiny 2 hours. And then going forward in the future with batteries being, going down the cost curve and being super cheap, would probably be able to replace those sunset fossil fuels with batteries as well. But I think this is one point that I really like to stress, that it's really important to recognize that where we can use what's cheap, we should absolutely use what's cheap.
Absolutely, that is a brilliant point, and we just gotta we gotta highlight that there's still some questions that will be good to respond to. One great question that someone said is how unreliable are the grids in some of these countries where we've held case studies? Are frequent long blackouts an incentive for transitioning to solar battery systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the really interesting thing is that in these countries, the pivot to renewables was actually to increase reliability. And the move to renewables really enhanced that reliability. So, for example, we can see that let me start with Kenya first because geothermal is 24/7. And Kenya, when it developed its geothermal resources, essentially was tapping into this like the most reliable form of clean energy for a simple grid, just available all the time. For Uruguay, wind energy made it far more reliable because remember, hydropower was getting increasingly unreliable because of the droughts that were happening persistently. And those droughts were only going to get worse. So there's a big insurance company called Swiss Re. This is the insurance company of insurance companies. So that's why it's a reinsurance company. And Swiss Re made these predictions that if Uruguay doesn't switch to something else, it's going to be in trouble, and blackouts are going to get increasingly frequent because the conventional reliance on oil and hydropower wasn't going to cut it. So actually, Uruguay's transition happens from a context of blackouts that got eliminated and less frequent because of wind energy. So I think that these cases are so interesting because what they show is that you know, weather variability is increasingly easy to predict. Like we can deal with that. We know when it will be sunny, we know when it will be windy, but a lot of our conventional sources of energy production are very much exposed to climate risks. By the way, the same is true for fossil fuels as well. I mean, they are increasingly also being subject to climate risks. And one of the ways to understand that is because of the water energy nexus. So conventional thermal generation, like coal and oil, they need huge amounts of water to cool down those plants to keep them operational within safety limits. And if water scarcity becomes a bigger and bigger problem with climate change, which we know it will, um, we may not have enough water resources to spare to cool down thermal plants. Thermal, as the name suggests, thermal heat. Most of our conventional
Own stuff like
electricity
fossil
generation.
fuels. Yeah.
Exactly. Thermal is a way of describing fossil fuels. So I think that water energy nexus often gets overlooked, but is super, super critical to consider. So yeah, and by the way, to this question, I think Justin put, um, why are the insurers' views not getting traction? This is a great question because across the insurance world, they have now understood the water energy nexus, the threat that climate change presents to both fossil fuel generation as well as hydropower. And I would love for this to go beyond the realms of technical insurance modeling to popular narratives. And I think that was a great question somewhere up there on why BBC journalists are not doing their job well enough. And I think one of the problems is that in our world, we're so used to reporting crises, like acute crises, that we miss the stories that play out over 5 to 6 years, which all of these case studies have. And they're really fast for the energy transition, but they're slow for the journalistic cycle because the journalistic cycle still prioritize, conventional journalism. I'm not talking about alternative journalism, but the BBC still, I think, has this bias towards really acute crises. So yeah, I think that, I do think that that's a really big issue here.
think I'll hop in now. That's a great ending point for us to have everyone think about those sort of long-term stories that we might be wanting to bring into focus more instead of just always focusing on those short-term crises. It's been so lovely to learn from both of you, Sam and Dr. Srivastav, today. Thank you so much for all of your time in this hopeful conversation. Before we wrap up the event today, I just have a few housekeeping items for everyone to consider. If you like what we're doing, please consider becoming a Climate Action Now supporting member for as little as $4.95 every month. CAN members are truly the backbone of what allows our small but mighty team to keep bringing you these hopeful events. So we're very grateful for any support you're able to offer us. I also invite you to join our next event on May 20th, the Save the Ice Climate Action Party. We'll be joined at that event by science fiction author Kim Stanley Robinson, engineer Dr. Leslie Field, and climate policy expert Durwood Zelk. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. Thank you again to our incredible speaker, Dr. Srivastav, for sharing her time and insights with us tonight. We're so appreciative of that. And thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen as well. That brings
Yeah, huge thanks to the entire team, to Liz, to Sam, to Kaylee, and the entire Climate Action Now team. It's been like a genuine pleasure, and thank you for the work you do. And to the
Thank you.
audience,
Thank you for the work
you
you
guys
do.
did
Thank
great.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This has been great. The monthly dose of climate hope, everybody. This will be we're gonna keep doing events like these. Thank you so much, Dr. Srivastav, for your time and your energy and your work. Thank you all for organizing this. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all so much.